mean, that whole transition. Oops. Okay, I'm calling to order the board meeting of the Marin Municipal Water District for November 16th, 2021. And our first item of business is to call the roll.
Director Bregman.
Here.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Schmidt.
Here.
And President Kohler.
Here. Okay, sorry, I'm just having a little trouble with my agenda for some reason. My computer's a little frozen. Since I can't actually look at my agenda right now. Our next item is, we're not doing public comment, we're waiting. Do we have any public comment on the closed session?
There are none.
We did have adoption of the agenda on the.
Oh, you're
on
quite
the
right.
agenda.
I skipped right over that. Okay, so I'm now looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Second.
Do we have any public comments on the agenda?
There are none.
Do we have any further board comments on the agenda? Okay, then we need the roll call.
Director Bregman.
Aye.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Kohler.
Aye. All right, we are now adjourning to closed session. We're all going to be leaving this link and going to the other link.
Yes, and I'll send you quickly the email to that other link.
Perfect.
Thank you. We go out and go back.
This is the regular meeting of the Marin Municipal Board of Directors for November 16th, 2020. We are reconvening after closed session with no reportable items. Now is the time for public comment on any item that is not on the agenda. Terry, do we have any public comments?
There are no raised hands.
Okay. We're going to move on then to directors and general managers announcements. Ben, do you have any announcements?
You're on
Director-
mute.
I'm sorry about that. I do not have any tonight, President Kohler.
Directors announcements?
I have just a comment, just to commend staff on the clearing of around Lake Lagunitas. About 2/3 of the lake shore has been cleared of dead wood. And it's amazing. That project has really opened up that part of the watershed, and I'm sure actually will help the production of water in that little lake. So it's a really impressive project, and I would suggest everybody on the board take a look at it. It has really changed sort of the vibe on that side of Lagunitas, and very beautifully well done, very well done. So thank you, guys.
Excellent. That's great.
I have just one comment also. I, within the last couple of days, received from Ron Thyssen, our former engineer, and Matt Circle, of our ranger, about a 40-minute, I think it was 42-minute, 1935 silent movie made about the water district. And I'm gonna, it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, it has some dubbed in sound that was done much later, I think probably sometime in the 60s or 70s even. But it's a fantastic historical piece. I'm going to talk to Matt and I guess Ron too, to see if there's some way we can get that more into the system, and maybe even on our webpage as a little bit more availability. It's just a really exciting, piece of history, to tell you the truth. Yeah.
Can you send it out to us?
I'll give it a shot. I certainly can get it sent. I'll get it sent to the rest of the board.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
That sounds great. Any other directors' announcements? Then I'll just share briefly that I had the opportunity to speak to the Marin Environmental Forum last week about water, and had the privilege of appearing with Jay Lund, who's a professor at UC Davis. So they're making, I think, a tape of that available. And we had an incredibly lively conversation. Lots of people showed up. There were so many questions. We couldn't answer them all. So we have now made those available. We've now answered those questions in written form. So thanks again to the staff for doing that. And if people want to see the recording, I'm sure you can find that. The Marin Environmental Forum will make it available. So it was a great, great opportunity. Okay, that brings us to the consent calendar. I am looking for an approval motion.
Move approval of our consent calendar.
You know, I'll second it. You know, I wanted to make a suggestion that we add items 9 and 10 to the consent calendar, which are routine hires.
They're on the consent calendar.
No, they're not actually.
On my agenda,
Oh,
they are.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think he's talking about the 14 and 15. No,
Yeah.
at the very end of the agenda. Isn't that what you're talking about? Request to
14 and
fill
15.
temporary engineering.
Yeah,
Okay,
I've got them as items 9 and 10.
on my agenda, they're 14 and 15.
Mine too.
Yeah,
So just to be clear, Larry, you are suggesting to amend the consent calendar to include items 14 and 15?
On
Instead of the
mine,
number-
it's 9 and 10. but-
Okay, sorry. So let me do this. To include the item to request to fill a temporary engineering aid position and future meeting, well, I think future meeting we should keep off of the consent calendar, but
It's just information.
is there anything else that you want to include on the consent calendar?
No,
other than-
it's causing more confusion than it's worth, but
No, it's okay. I
it's
think we
to-
got it.
It's to approve filling a senior human resources
Oh,
analyst.
that's already on the consent calendar on my
It
agenda.
is?
yeah.
Sorry.
But there is also a temporary engineering aid
That's,
position,
yeah, 14.
which
No.
I would say, just in keeping with what we're trying to do here to make things more simple, is that it is to put the rehires and temporary hires onto the consent calendar as a way of speeding things up and also deferring to staff. So
Yeah,
that also
I,
seems, I would second that motion if it requires that.
Okay, so Molly,
that's-
the question is this. Since we apparently are working off of different agendas, my agenda
no,
has.
no. It's my
Oh.
mistake. It was my mistake.
Okay, so I think we have a board suggestion to add item 14, request to fill a temporary engineering aid position to
Right.
the consent calendar. Can we do that?
I think we should leave it on the report agenda item for today, because that's how it was presented to the public on
Okay.
the agenda. But in the future, we can take that into account. I do think that there's a distinction between the two requests to fill positions that are on the consent calendar and the one that is not, in that one is not a budgeted position, but I
I see.
would have to defer to staff on.
No, that's correct. That's why but
Okay.
it may make sense to handle temporaries
Okay,
on the consent calendar and just
Certainly
call
can do that.
out if they're budgeted or not.
okay, no problem. I'm gonna go back and see if we've got a motion to approve the consent calendar without any changes.
So moved.
Great. Have I got a second?
Second,
Do we have any board comment? Okay, Terry, do we have any public comment on this item?
There are none.
Okay, then I need a roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Vice President Russell, not yet, and President Kohler.
Aye. That brings us to the regular calendar, item 11, which is a resolution authorizing the general manager to execute a contract for furnishings and delivery of welded steel pipe in the amount of 1.4 million. Actually, almost 1.5.
Good evening, directors. Alex Anaya, Engineering Services for Design Manager, will be presenting this item.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good evening, directors. I'm Alex Anaya, Engineer Manager of the Design Section. This evening, I will be bringing the contract 1966 for the authorization to purchase welded steel pipe. On average, the district orders welded steel pipe for all our fire flow and capital projects about every 2 years. And the last order we had for the welded steel pipe was in August of 2019. Staff keeps track of the pipe inventory and compares it to the 2-year CIP budget and the fire flow program, along with the current pipeline projects that are in construction to determine the future needs, while also maintaining a pipeline quantity for district forces to repair main breaks as they happen. Based on the projected pipeline needs, it is determined that the district needs to order about 31,320 feet of pipe ranging in size between 4 and 24 inches. District staff issued a notice of inviting bids on October 12th of 2021 for the order of 4, 12, 14, 18, 20, and 24-inch welded steel pipe. On October 26th, the district received and opened 2 bids for this contract. The lowest responsive and responsible bid was submitted by West Coast Pipelining Incorporated in the amount of $1,669,178.31. District staff have been discussing the possibility of possibly using some 24-inch pipe from the emergency intertie project should that intertie project not proceed. So as a result, staff has decided to omit the 24-inch pipeline from this order, which is within the district's authority to do so, so long as it does not exceed 25% of the total contract bid price. So based on this change, the adjusted contract bid amount totals $1,458,507.17. So staff is requesting that the board authorize the general manager to execute contract number 1966 with West Coast Pipelining Incorporated at the adjusted amount of $1,458,507.17. And I will take any questions at this time.
Let me just add, directors, that if the intertie project moves forward, which we hope that it does, there's enough time on our CIP schedule to come back to order the 24-inch pipe that was identified for the normal CIP program. We would come back with a second request at that time, and we'll have plenty of time for the fabrication of that pipe before that project is scheduled to begin.
Okay. Board comments on this item? Terry, do we have any public comments on this item?
No, there are none.
Okay, then we're looking for a roll call. Well, maybe I'll just, I think I understand. I mean, you're basically saying, Alex, that this is, if the project if the intertie goes forward, there are options for addressing this particular allocation of funds for pipe.
Absolutely, Director Kohler. We could definitely do that at a future date.
Okay. All right. Then I'm looking for a motion on this item.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Roll call.
Director, I'm sorry, Director Bregman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to item 12, the drought update. This is an information item, not an approval item.
Good evening, Board of Directors. I'm going to pull up my screen. Let's see. Okay. Good evening. Tonight we have a drought update for you, a presentation. And starting off first, I wanted to show this picture up here, this picture montage a bit. This was taken by Jonathan Kaler, our fisheries program manager out at Sewell-Hooley, and it's showing first October 15th when Sewell-Hooley was at 8% of total capacity, and then the impact of those those back-to-back storms in which we jumped up to 26% of total capacity by October 26th. So you can see, the impact on one of our larger reservoirs. It's a pretty interesting picture there showing.
Mm-hmm.
So tonight we'll start off with an update on water supply, give an update on the most recent drought activities and outreach, and then we'll move into an update on the emergency drought projects and the most recent project status. So starting off first with an update on rainfall. Through mid-November, we've had just over 22 inches of rain, which is just about 270% of average for this time of year. It's a great start for this time of year, and we're very happy to see it for the watershed, especially after having the last 2 years be exceedingly dry. But it's still quite a bit from being completely full for our reservoirs, and we still have quite a bit of the rainy season to go. So looking forward to seeing how we move into December. So looking now at our total reservoir storage, you can see that we've updated it, showing kind of a slow incline up as we've seen more and more runoff come into the reservoirs. Our total capacity as of this morning is just above 45,000 acre feet, which for this time of year, it's still about 7,000 acre feet below average. And as you'll notice on that orange line showing last year, we're still a bit below where we were last year. So still trailing trailing going into the wet season from where we were last year. And looking ahead, right now, it looks like we might get a little bit of rain at the end of the week, but as far as we can tell, there doesn't seem to be any significant rain that's projected through the end of November, but we'll continue to monitor it and hope to see that we still get some rainfall through the end of the month. So then moving into an update on our projected reservoir storage, we've updated the curves given the boost in storage that we've had, the significant boost that we've had. And now, moving into this wet, rainy season, it becomes quite a game of uncertainty, not knowing what December will look like. And, given that they've pretty certainly called this a La Nina year, that's another layer of uncertainty that we'll see. But we're going to be, over the next few board meetings and months, is coming up with some different ways of looking at this projected reservoir storage in order to think about how storage plays into the decision making as far as the drought and the conservation actions that we've enacted over the past 9 months. So looking at this and thinking about kind of what the next 9 to 12 months will look like, depending on rainfall. And then tying into our actual water use that we've seen. Since April, we have been seeing water use decline, and then quite a significant drop in the last month. You'll see on the blue. So as that rainy storms came through, we saw the demand drop pretty significantly. And then over the last 2 weeks, I've seen a 45% reduction in water use. And so it's really, hands off to our customers and really, hearing our messaging going out to turn off their irrigation and, decrease their water use now that the landscape has been kind of saturated quite a bit. So, looking ahead, we'll hopefully see that the irrigation stays off and that demand continues to stay low. So an update on drought activities and outreach. First, starting off with our recycled water fill station. We opened up in the middle of August. And over that period, we distributed just under 400,000 gallons of recycled water to customers that showed up at the station in San Rafael. So the total visits that we saw was just around 3,700 visits from customers. And going into each week, we saw on average in October around 100, 150 on average every day coming through, as it was still very, very dry. And then moving into November, as the rain hit and everybody turned off their irrigation, we saw demand drop down to just 4 customers showing up at the station. So we've temporarily closed the station, recognizing that if it dries out for a few weeks, we'll look at opening up, starting first maybe with a day here or there and see, how our customers respond. And what we've heard so far is really a lot of gratitude and appreciation for the recycled water fill station. You'll see over here is just one of the emails that came through saying how much they appreciated the fill station over the last 4 or 5 months. So it's been great to run that program our first year and our first time really running that for the district. And now I'm going to hand off to Emma Detweiler, our acting public information officer, who's going to take over.
Thank you, Lucy. Good evening, everyone. So the communications department has been focused the last couple of weeks on getting the word out about all of the new restrictions and resulting penalties going into effect December 1st. So what you're looking at is a postcard that is hitting mailboxes this week and gives an outline of these changes. So the water use limits and penalties, which I'll speak about a little bit later, the restrictions on pool filling, and also the outdoor irrigation. As of December 1st, no outdoor irrigation. So this is meant to provide an overview and then sends people back to our website and provides phone number, email address, and then landing page on our website where all of this information is housed. So this is going to not only our customers, this is going to all mailing addresses in the service area. So this is an additional list than just our standard customer list. We have posted this all across social media, and it will also be featured in our e-news. Next slide, please. So coupled with that broad outreach to customers and everyone in our service area, we also took the time to do these tailored letters. So these are custom letters that were sent to over 7,000 of our customers that their water bills had reached into tiers 2, 3, and 4. So we sent customized letters to those customers that in this yellow box here, you can see a customized calculation of their water use. And then if that water use continued past December 1st, the impact to their first winter water bills. So we're hoping that coupled with these two outreach pieces that we can get the word out, and we're hoping to change behavior and continue to bring that demand for our water down. Next slide, please.
That's great, Emma. Thank you very much for cranking those letters out.
Yes, no problem. I was going to give you a shout out. I think that was your suggestion. I wasn't sure if you had joined, but thank you. We did get those out, and so far they've been well received.
That's good. That's good.
Thank you. So for the customer newsletter that is now out, this is in our November and December bills. So this is rolling out now. It really covers a lot of ground. It gives an update on the drought, focusing on the district's response to the drought crisis, provides resources to check our latest rainfall and reservoir levels so that through this November, December period, people can really just check in and see how our water supply is doing. We also, on the backside of the newsletter, we have a banner to turn off your irrigation system. We have a call out for the Cash for Grass lawn replacement program. And we also have a lot of content here about our rebate and incentive programs. So this is what's hitting people's bills all through November and December, and we're working on our January, February newsletter now. Next slide, please. And also included in the November, December bills, this was, I believe, also a board request. We have a two-sided indoor and outdoor water savings kind of cheat sheet for people. So it not only shows how much water they can estimate the water using fixtures in their homes to use, but also what the improvement is if you convert that to a water saving fixture, or if you can lower, the minutes that you're showering, the amount of time times you're using your dishwasher, all kinds of water saving tips for indoors and outdoors. And, drought or not, these are the kinds of things we want to see our customers doing. So this is going out to more than 50,000 mailing addresses and all of our customers, also on our website, and is on our social media pages as well. And just looking ahead, so we do have our communications and water efficiency meeting tomorrow morning, where I'll be getting into more details on all of these items. But in general, we have the emergency intertype project webinar, project update, and project information meeting. We'll be working on securing a date in the next couple of days. As always, we're going to continue our rebate and incentive outreach, just really try to increase that participation level. And then overall, we are working on an update, a change in our messaging, looking at our water supply these days, and just talking about how sustainable water use is our new normal here in Marin. I think that this Facebook post does a good job of kind of encompassing the tone and the messaging that we have been leading with, that, we're very thankful for the rain. We're watching our reservoirs go up, but we need to keep these conservation numbers going. We've met our goal here. We have our 45% savings that we've seen for 2 weeks now. So just encouraging people to keep doing that. And also here, call out to our rebates. So we are having rain, so take advantage of some of our rebates, like our rain barrels. That seems timely. So kind of taking a lot of elements and putting them together for our customers and moving forward with that updated messaging. So I believe I will pass this now to Paul Sellier, who will provide another update.
Yeah, good evening, Paul Sellier, Operations Director. Next slide, Lucy. So our emergency intertype project, tonight we're going to cover, just a brief update on the infrastructure. We've got a number of board decisions that will be upcoming in the next couple of months. and specifically a couple items to talk about tonight. Additional materials pre-purchased for the project and some strengthening work that needs to occur on the bridge before we place the pipeline on there. And we also heard from the board that you'd be interested in some draft principles for the operation of the intertie to help guide its use. So we've got a few of those tonight as well. And lastly, we'll finish up with our activities that we've been working on with Sonoma Water. Next slide. So in terms of the infrastructure on project update, we're working to complete the on-deck, the on-bridge design work. As you can imagine, that's the most tricky and unusual element of the project. Our other half of our team is working to design the pipeline in the approaches to the bridge, and coordinating some thoughts on how to minimize impacts in terms of construction in those areas. And finally, of course, we're preparing BCDC permits and encroachment permits, both San Rafael and for Richmond ultimately. The upcoming board decisions that I talked about, so we'll just step through these briefly. Purchase of additional materials. So we've already asked the board, and the board's authorized to pre-purchase of pipe. But in order to place that pipe on the bridge, we'll need a number of custom hangers. We'll also need some ability to join those pipes together. So there are some couplings and expansion joints and a couple of other items that we'll need to purchase in advance of the project. We'll also be looking to secure the purchase of transfer water. And I think tomorrow night, Contra Costa Water District will be taking an item to their board for authorization for purchase of transfer water. Upcoming, as you know, we've been working closely with Caltrans since May. And Caltrans are working on I think 2 or 3 agreements that we'll need to complete with them to handle reimbursement for Caltrans's work on the project. The first of which will be maybe on the order of $1 million. Pre-strengthening work on the bridge that I mentioned, we have a slide upcoming on that. But essentially, there's some rivets that need to be replaced with high-strength bolts, so that we don't, by placing the pipe on the bridge, we don't sort of consume any capacity that the bridge has. And then, of course, as we think about construction of the project itself, the district will need to engage construction management firm to inspect and manage the work. We will also need to complete a wheeling agreement with East Bay Mud, and then finally issue a construction contract. Next slide. So those materials that I spoke about briefly, the pipe support brackets, and you can see some cost estimates here, and pipe fittings and expansion joints. Of course, the bridge moves quite a bit, as you can imagine. So there are a number of expansion joints throughout the run. There will be a need for us to order some 12-inch pipe that originally had been ordered as 18-inch pipe. And this is because we would be, with the 18-inch pipe, the diameter is such that we would be infringing upon the traffic envelope. And to do that, we would need a Federal Highway Administration exception. And those are just not viable in the time frame of the project. So by changing to 12-inch diameter pipe, we would of course have to purchase more of that pipe. And so the cost, net change in materials cost is shown here at about $2.2 million to switch from 18-inch to 12-inch diameter pipe over a couple of sections in the bridge. Similarly, we have 2 bolted steel tanks that would be placed at Pelican Way. Those tanks were bid with a seismic resilience risk category of 3, which is typical of what you would do with tanks that are not intended for, say, supplying fire suppression water, which technically these tanks are not. But given the relative importance of the tanks, I think it would be wise for us to upgrade the seismic resilience of the tanks to risk category 4, and that would allow us to consider them as fire suppression facilities for the district. Next slide. The pre-strengthening work. So this is the rivet replacement. This is at 8 locations, and when bridge guys talk about 8 locations, they really mean 16, because there typically are 2 structures, one on each side of the bridge. I think there are 5 or 6 rivets at each location that need to be replaced with bolts. In preparation for hanging the pipe on the floor beams of the bridge, as luck would have it, the bridge has lead-based paint. So we've got to have a specialty contractor come in and remove that paint and prepare the beams to receive the pipe hangers. In addition, there are 2 movable platforms at the east end of the bridge that are used for bridge maintenance, and those need to be removed to accommodate the pipeline. And of course, we'd need inspection services for this work. The environmentals for this work will clear in mid-December, so we could start that work with the board's consent sometime in January, probably most likely start date for this work. Next slide. So that brings us to the draft principles. And I think here, rather than go through each of these, the intent is to establish these as sort of guide rails for the project. And really the first one just talks about our intended use of the pipeline, which is to prevent a water shortage emergency and to provide sufficient water for the health and safety of our customers. I don't know if it's worth going through item by item, or if it's worth me reading these, or if the board would like to engage as we go through.
I don't think so, Paul. I think we've all got your,
Okay.
your write-up. I think we should have a board conversation at the end of your presentation.
Very good.
That's okay.
Yep, absolutely. Great. Thank you. So then I will just speed through these. The water transfer is basically then, we need to maximize our local resources before we consider water transfers. Next slide. And then, of course, an item talking about water conservation that the district would need to engage in and be successful at. And then some thought toward how we would think about what water would we use for water transfers. And, really, we're trying to think about using only surplus water and water that would otherwise be consumptively used or purchased by someone else if we didn't use it. Next slide. And then, of course, the golden rule, where our operation of the intertie would not adversely affect any partner agency. And then on the right, if you have really good eyes, you can make out what the resolution would look like. But I've emailed that directly to the board. Next
Well,
slide.
and I think it's also is it in the, oh, so it's not in the packet.
Yeah.
Okay.
If we would like, we can zoom in on that afterwards. So that brings us to sort of our collaboration with Sonoma Water. And of course, we'll continue to work with Sonoma to, all opportunities to address the drought. And they've been doing some really interesting work on as I've mentioned to the board previously, on winter water. And right now with the current storms, we've been able to take advantage of that. And the district's been taking 12 MGD for most of November. If we were able to sustain that 12 MGD for the whole month, that would be about 1,100 acre feet for just November. Of course, extra water, right? Normally, of course, we'd be taking some water. So extra water, we might think of that as 600 acre feet. So over the 7-month interval of when winter water would be viable, if we had precipitation, I think we could count maybe on getting a maximum, sort of the best case scenario for us, of 3,000 acre feet by next year. And that's if it's wet and that flow is available in the river.
And if it's dry, Paul, can you give us a sense of what's because we're not thinking it's going to be a wet year. All indications are that this is a La Nina and we're likely to see another dry winter. So what do you think is a more realistic amount from that?
It's difficult to say, but I think as we look at the chart on the right, with the, and you can see the arrow down to where it says drier. And if we look at the green shaded curve, the lowest one there has a number of dots. As you move to the right and get closer to the dark black line, you can see the amount of water between that black line, which is sort of what we might normally expect in dry conditions. It gets much less. So I think in dry conditions, that number may shrink to about 1,000 acre-feet.
Okay, I just think it's important because you've got a slide up here that says winter water provides an extra 3,000 acre-feet by May 2022 rather. And that I think that for the board and the public, we just need to know. And again, we totally understand this is all about the rain and we can't predict the rain, but that seems like an optimistic number. Am I right? Or is that a realistic number?
It's the best case scenario, I think.
So it's the best case scenario. And I guess what I'm trying to ask you is what's the most realistic case? Because I'm never interested in really extreme cases, either best case or worst case, but what is the most realistic case scenario in your judgment? And then of course, if you're wrong, we'll smack you with, no, I'm kidding. It's just, I think the board and the public really need to know, not the extremes, but we really need to know, what's the range of reasonable likelihood given, assuming a relatively dry winter, which is what we're hearing, which is what we're anticipating. I mean, look, if it's a wet winter, great, but that doesn't seem to be what we're anticipating.
Yeah, so if it continues to be dry, I think it really does depend if we get curtailed from Sonoma. If we're curtailed, right, and it's really dry, we may be looking at less than our minimum take or pay total. So essentially we'd be less than normal, right? So you'd be down in water. We normally would take 5,300 acre-feet as a minimum take or pay from Sonoma. If it was very dry and we were curtailed, that could drop to 4,300 acre-feet for the year. I think that given that we're going to see likely some rain across the winter, we would expect somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 acre-feet out of winter water.
Thanks.
In addition to our take and pay 5,300.
Correct.
Okay.
But as a nod to that level of uncertainty and the 10,000 caveats that I want to add to the end of that
Right.
statement.
We get that. We get that.
Right. December is just around the corner. And as we look at how the stream flow is decaying in the Russian River, we may have enough flow in the river to continue the 12 MGD for November. But in December, we're notified that North Marin will begin filling Stafford Lake. So there's going to be less capacity in the aqueduct there. Anyway, the flow in the river is contingent on rain. We do know that there are hydraulic pinch points in the pipe network between Castania and our district, our services, and we're working to identify those and resolve those pinch points. The other aspect that we're looking at with Sonoma is groundwater wells. And, right, there are 3 wells, one of which Todd Road is back in service. The combined capacity of all of the wells is somewhere between 5 and 6 MGD. The timing, it seems, is somewhat uncertain, but it looks like the 3rd well might not be available until October next year. So we want to work with Sonoma to find out if there's a way for us to accelerate that and to what extent Marin can benefit from. And so that we'll be working on that. I have a meeting with Sonoma on Friday to go through some of those issues. And next slide. So the next steps then. The next steps then are we'll continue to refine and enhance the drought outreach and conservation efforts. And 45%, I mean, that's a pretty amazing result that we've been able to obtain with the help of our customers, and hope that continues. We're going to continue, obviously, working on our projects for water supply, and of course, ongoing monitoring and reporting back to the board on status as compared to established conservation goals.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul, and everybody else who contributed to the drought update. It was, as always, very thorough and extremely helpful. What I'd like to do now is go to board comment, and then we'll go to public comment after that. Any board comments on this report? There's a lot here. We have to have some comments.
Yeah, I've got some comments on the principles. You know, I'd like to see us actually adopt almost a more proactive set addition to our principles. There's integrated floodplain management principles that I think we should be encouraging, so that we're not just taking from the Bay Delta if we go through with this emergency intertie. So I think, you know, in order to encourage that, we might want to consider adopting as a principle that not only would we be trying to take so-called surplus water, and I don't really know if there is such a thing as surplus water for the Bay Delta, but that somehow we would be encouraging integrated floodplain management to where we would, with this project, encourage almost more of a healing of the Bay Delta rather than just extracting more water out of the Delta. And I'm not quite sure how we can do it other than to try to make arrangements or agreements, maybe with Yuba County or some other agency that we're going to be potentially dealing with, to make that part of our compact with them, that some of the money would go towards increasing groundwater storage with integrated floodplain management for the Bay Delta. So it's just right now, if we do the project, we're going to be another agency taking away from the Delta, which is already in a state of environmental collapse. And I think if we led with a proactive approach towards contributing towards increasing the Bay Delta's floodplain and groundwater storage, it would, you know, maybe make up for what we're going to possibly be doing with that emergency intertie.
So I agree, Larry. I think I might put it a little differently, but I think it would be useful for the board to have a conversation about each of these principles, since I mean, I think it's a good place to start. So just taking the first one, because I think I think management and staff need direction on this. The first one is just the basic principle that the intertie will be used to prevent a water storage emergency. I think this is an incredibly important principle because there's a lot of concern, certainly one that I share, that in putting our straw into the larger, infrastructure in California. I mean, it really, this isn't just the East Bay, this is the South Bay, the Central Valley. So I think it really behooves us to indicate that if we're going to move in this direction, and of course we haven't decided to, but if we do, that this is about emergencies. This is about human health and safety. So I just want to check in and make sure that the board is on board with that as an initial principle. I'm going to take it, Larry, from what you've said that you agree, but I just want to check in with everybody else because I think the staff does need direction in this regard. Are we aligned on that?
I think it's maybe a good way to start framing the issue. What I was trying to sort of advocate for is to go beyond that.
I agree. I'm just trying to start at the beginning. That's all. I'm just trying to, I'm going to get to that. I just want to take them one at a time. If that's okay with you? Because I'm agreeing with you.
I just don't know if the financial reality is going to permit that kind of constraint, honestly. I'm
sorry?
It's $100 million and we may not be using it every year. I mean, doesn't sound realistic to me, honestly. I mean, I agree.
So I'm concerned.
Principle. I agree with you in principle.
Because I'm concerned. So what I don't want to do is spend $100 million on lawns and medians, right?
Agreed.
So for me, this is a basic first principle. Like I am not going to be comfortable if we are not constraining ourselves to use this in for human health and safety, as opposed to, I mean, we are already being accused of using this to use water in a profligate way for lawns, for medians, for waterways.
Swimming pools.
Yes, exactly. So I think, so for me, I think this can only be justified as a human health and safety measure. So I just want to, I completely agree with you, Larry. I just want to start here and see if we're aligned as a board.
Wayne, and say, I agree, Director Kohler. We should go into this with the awareness that that is the intended use for it, and not to become something that we use on a regular basis. And with all the consequences, I think that would negatively impact the long-term sustainability of our district.
Any other board thoughts on this first principle? And we can add more principles. I just want to start with what's here. Okay. The second principle that staff has proposed is that we'll only consider using this if a shortage is projected, and we have maximized or planned to maximize all local resources, including water available from Sonoma, including winter water and future groundwater, and groundwater storage options. That seems reasonable to me. We've had a principle.
I think it's pretty ambiguous. I do.
Oh,
And
okay.
I mean, maybe what we need to, I mean, if you really want to set a bright line on this thing, we should only use it if we declare a drought emergency.
Fair enough.
Okay, I mean, that's, to me, is like a straight up, bright line, because everything else is kind of like pretty ambiguous, I think. So if and that's what gets me worried about that kind of language.
No, I think that's a really fair, I think it's an important point. I would certainly support that kind of limitation, that literally we would need to declare a drought emergency. I'm on board with that. Board thoughts, staff thoughts on that?
Well, are you suggesting, we have in our ordinance the specification for under what circumstances specifically that we declare an emergency?
Right, we do.
Are you suggesting that should be built into the principle?
I think, Larry, certainly I agree with that. Larry, that is your point, right?
That is my point, that
Yeah.
if we're going to have principles, they need to be enforceable. And the only,
And they need to be transparent, right?
yes, and clear. So
Okay, transparent and clear, fair enough.
So,
what I'm suggesting is that is the bright line that has sort of moved us in our conservation and efficiency program. So, if we're going to really have a principle that's enforceable, that's what I'm putting on the table.
so if I could very briefly just share a comment, and I do understand and appreciate where this conversation's going on this principle. I would ask the board just to consider an element of flexibility. And the way it's written was intentional, and it may not be where you want to go, is if a water shortage is projected. And the reason we did that is that would allow the board to look ahead and move forward on transfers before we're in a dire declared emergency, where at that point there's a lot of competition for that water. So I do want it to be certainly a board decision on when it's used. I just think a bright line may or likely would have, some unintended consequences on the timing for the use of it.
I think though, I think Larry and I are in agreement that we need a principle in place. And I think I will want to move, as we've discussed in the past, Ben, from principles to actual guardrails, legally enforceable guardrails about how and when this is used. Because there is a danger in connecting to all of this, this very, very extensive, infrastructure that, we really do abandon our commitment to efficiency and sustainability in the light of climate change. And this just becomes a way for, the water district to simply, support profligate, I don't want to say profligate, but, not entirely efficient water use. So I think we need to balance your concerns about timing and process with the concerns that Larry and I are raising about ensuring that this is really used in the situations where it's necessary for health and human safety. So I don't want to belabor this too much, but I think the direction to staff is to come up with a solution that addresses that balance.
I think we need generalized principles, as they're called, as opposed to specific ordinance type language. We're not going. It's folly to think that we're going to control future boards by doing that. Each board will come along and make their own decisions based on their own circumstances in the environment at the moment. And all we're doing is burdening the system if we bog it down with too technical types of restraints.
Well, I mean, Jack, there's always a future board, but that doesn't mean that this board doesn't have an obligation or responsibility to lay out where we're coming from.
And that's why we're.
If a future board wants to say, we're abandoning that, then they can do that. But I'm certainly not going to vote for $100 million project that has no constraints on it in terms of when and how it's used.
Well, in reality, it won't have any constraints because a future board can turn it upside down.
But that's a future board. We don't have to. That doesn't mean that this board doesn't have an obligation to establish some level of guardrails now.
And that's what we would be doing by establishment of our philosophical principles, if you like.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, but not ordinance type language that's that specific. It's just what our general philosophy is, what our intent is, and what our motive is in establishing all this.
Hey, Gordo, can you grab my charger, my battery, my phones, my things about to die?
I guess I won that one.
In the thing.
Works for me, Jack.
Sorry, I'm having technical challenges, so I had to get in touch with my technical advisor.
Jack declared victory while you were gone, by the way.
I'm sorry?
Jack declared victory while you were gone.
Oh, okay, cool. No, I mean, obviously there's no board that can constrain a future board. I'm just saying that doesn't relieve us of responsibilities to establish. Thank you so much. Perfect. That doesn't relieve us of obligations to, establish the principles that are relevant while we're here. If another board wants to do something different, then they can do that. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be establishing the guardrails and the principles that we think are relevant at this point in time.
Yep. Agreed. I mean, otherwise the principles are just going to, Jack, they're going to be unenforceable, and, it's going to be so discretionary it really is going to be unenforceable, so, and we do have that ordinance that 1305-020, I think it is, which establishes 40,000 acre feet as of April 1st being a bright line.
Okay.
So, does that really impinge on our discretion? It's been on the books for 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, just a thought, if I could. So in water transfers, typically by April, it's too late.
So all I'm saying, Paul and Ben, is that I think we're asking you to come up with a balance here, right? I mean, there's language that can be crafted, and you've got, a wonderful, resource in Molly and others on your staff to balance these two issues, right? On the one hand, I think what the board is saying, for the most part, I mean, I may be wrong about this, but certainly Larry Bragman and I are saying that we should be establishing some guidance about when this is used. This is not about lawns and medians and pools and, spraying off, sidewalks. right? That this is, if we're going to do this, this needs to be a serious matter of human health and safety. And what you're raising is a process issue, which isn't unimportant, but it's just a matter of coming up with language that balances those two concerns. So I don't think we need to do that wordsmithing tonight, but I think you've got the guidance that you need, unless I'm hearing board objections to that, other board objections to that.
Could I just expand on something? I mean, I think the elephant in the room is development. And, that's what I'm hearing. So when you're talking about health and safety, if and when, there are these 14,000 units that are built in Marin County pursuant to ABAG, you're going to hear plenty of shouting for the health and safety of those units. So that's going to open the door on this project. And I think that's the elephant in the room is the development issue. And, that's what concerns me about these principles, unless you have that bright line. So
that, Larry, not to interrupt, but that might be a great segue to the next principle, which is about the district shall maintain and implement a water efficiency and conservation program designed to achieve a 20% reduction to 98 gallons per capita per day over the next 10 years. And I'll just say, for me, that doesn't work. That's basically where we should be now. We probably are there now. And it's not at all where we need to be in 10 years. We probably need to be closer to 60 in 10 years, given what's happening with climate change. So, I think we need to talk about that. To me, a 20% reduction from 124, gallons of water per person per day. That's, to quote my friend Larry Russell, that's chump change. If we're serious about our demand reduction, we need to be talking about significantly. Let me back up. I think setting a goal on these principles for what our GPCD should be is exactly right. I think that's where we need to be. Is it 98? I don't think so. And I don't know that we as a board can either debate that or decide that tonight, but I'll just put out there for myself, that's pretty high. When you've got the California legislature having said almost 4 years ago that 55 GPCD is what we need indoors, and that's already very, very high. Most California communities are not at 55 indoor for residential use. They're much lower. 98 is very, very high. So,
on that,
people can disagree about what that number is, but that's too high for me.
On that point, we are planning to get into this tomorrow at the Comms Conservation meeting and talk about different options of numbers and what goes into them. So I think we'll be able to address that specifically, that item tomorrow.
Okay, that's great. So I guess my question for my fellow board members is, first, are we comfortable with the idea of beginning to establish, I guess I should say, a district goal for GPCD? I think we should. I think that's the only way we get to a reasonable, consensus around what is sustainable in light of climate change. And then, another question is, if we agree to that, what is the number?
Could I just say, I do hear a lot of comments and emails from folks saying they reject our sort of micromanaging the use by our irrigation restrictions, and would prefer actually to have a solid number per person per capita per day. So I think the concept of really setting that out as a goal and an ambitious goal is the right direction that we need to take. And I would, I think getting to a consensus on what that number is, that's a longer conversation. Should it be more ambitious than 98? Absolutely.
I'll just say that I think we need to dig into this, and we should have a goal, and it should be ambitious, because I think ambitious today is gonna be something we're thankful for 10 years from now. So, but what that number is and how we craft it so that it's clear and and provides guidance is something that is for a longer conversation.
And
But something that we
achievable.
need to have about
And
soon.
achievable.
And achievable.
I mean, we've got a pretty good record of achievement on this district, as criticized as we've been. You know, we've reduced use by a third in
Right,
the last 15 years with
Yeah.
population growth. So,
right.
you know, some of the flack we're getting is really, you know, just, you know, noise, really. And, you know, I think we should be setting ambitious goals and trying to, you know, demonstrate leadership.
I agree. And frankly, not meeting a goal is not the end of the world. And, to me, I'd rather see us establish a goal and we fall short. If we do, we do. But we certainly fall short if we're not ambitious. And this 98 gallons of water per capita per day doesn't feel ambitious to me at all, particularly in light of the legislature's determination from 3 years ago, which at that time was considered not particularly ambitious. I think San Francisco, and Carrie can probably ground truth me on this. I think San Francisco's at 38. Is that right? Gallons of water per person per day? Am I close?
Slightly higher than that. Well, actually, San Francisco is one of my examples we'll present tomorrow. But
Okay.
they're in the 70s, I believe.
Oh, no, I'm talking about residential use. I'm sorry.
Right. So there's that's where
There is
you
that
know,
issue. Right.
the residential gallons per person per day is very different than a district-wide target or a
agree.
district-wide goal. And
I
so
agree.
those are different conversations.
I agree. And it would actually be my suggestion that we set both goals, because I think it's super confusing to consumers. We have 92% residential accounts. So I think it behooves us to establish a goal that our residential customers can understand, which has to be way lower than 98. And then I think people are smart enough to understand that there's two different goals, one for residential use and one for the district as a whole, which encompasses our commercial, industrial, and institutional use. So that's my other suggestion for this, is that because I think when people hear gallons per capita per day, they're thinking that means exclusively residential use. So I think we should set both. Here's our residential use, our single family home use specifically, which is different than multi-family homes, of course. And then kind of an overarching, but again, it's a longer conversation, but I think for me to feel comfortable with this project, we'll need to set both goals and they'll both need to be ambitious. So, and I think that brings us, Larry, to your point. That brings us to this next principle, which is that the selection of sources will be based on principles of sustainability, et cetera, and that will only consider water that is declared surplus, which is a very challenging term, and would otherwise be consumptively used. So, I mean, as somebody who spent a great deal of time in the Central Valley and has litigated endangered species cases, I am very sensitive to the both the perception and the reality of something like this pipeline and any transfers taking more water out of a very constrained system. So the question is, can we put guardrails around our water transfers that ensure that we are only taking wet water, which is to say water that would otherwise have been consumptively used? And what does it mean to move that water through the system? So I think this language needs to be worked on somewhat. I think the idea of declared surplus is challenging. I'd like to hear from the staff about that. But I think the idea of using water that would otherwise have been consumptively used is essential to this, that we are not in any way taking water for our own consumptive use here in Marin County that would otherwise have been dedicated or been available at least to in-stream uses. So I guess the question is, and it's a challenging question, how can we ensure that any water we take, obviously the wheeling situation is complicated, is water that would have been consumptively used, so that we are not having, so that we're literally having a zero net impact on the environmental systems of the Central Valley or wherever we're taking the water from.
So I guess the two quick points there. In terms of the surplus, that word was intentionally used to reflect the source of the water, so that it's not mistaken with maybe some San Joaquin Valley where we're taking water away from a farmer who might be trying to use it to grow crops, and therefore
Right.
we affect jobs. So the water transfers that we would engage in, should the board decide to, would be and have to be a water transfer, it has to be declared surplus by the source
I
of
see what
that
you're
water.
saying.
So
Okay.
that's what that reference is to. In terms of the sustainability or zero impact, for example, Yuba water that would be released, right, that would have an actual maybe benefit to the system should it flow all the way through to the Contra Costa intakes, because that water otherwise might not be released, or it might be consumed somewhere else. East Bay mud might take it out at Freeport or something. But if the water flows through the Delta, there could be an argument that there's a net benefit to the Delta, right? So
Short term.
yeah, or at least zero long-term impact, right? That water is just in transit through the Delta and would otherwise be held by Yuba for other consumptive uses. So that's one example of maybe, it's hard to say it's beneficial, right? But it certainly doesn't seem to be doing harm to the Delta. And given that we do pay sort of a transit fee in terms of what they call carriage losses, which can be as high as 30% of the volume that you purchase. So there is a significant what they call carriage losses through the Delta.
Well, my point was trying to create partnerships with agencies that are doing things to help the Delta.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand, Yuba has got a pretty good philosophy as far as, environmental projects.
Right.
But, the next phase that we're going to go into is trying to heal the Delta instead of just trying to use it as a source of extraction for water. And so that is what I'm trying to advocate for is that somehow we adopt as a principle that we will be working or encouraging or partnering with agencies that are doing integrated floodplain management, that are increasing groundwater, that are helping the Delta. And so we're not just a net subtraction or burden on the Delta, but that, we're paying it forward in some sense. So how do we put that in a principle? I mean, it's going to take some work and some thought, but I do think it's sort of like setting that goal we may not reach, but it's a good goal, and it's a goal that we should be pursuing.
And I think, Director Bragman, there are paths to get there. A number of these irrigation districts, they pay the farmer, but they also add an additional cost to it and put a fair chunk of the money into environmental enhancements projects. I don't know for certain that Yuba does that. I suspect they do. For example, I do know that Glen Calusa does that. So we can think about it and craft, that perhaps we would work with water sellers that have an established kind of offset program or environmental enhancement program that some of the proceeds go towards or something like that.
Right.
And if they don't, try and establish it or work.
Yeah,
with them.
I mean, maybe that is something we can help establish.
Right.
And it's something that needs to be done, obviously, for the entire state, for that whole system.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I was thinking of is essentially prioritizing working with willing sellers who are committed to providing environmental benefits. I mean, I'd like to see that as a discrete principle that, and again, going to the point that we can't bind future boards, we can't, but we can establish the principles that we care about while we're here. And for me, that would be an important one is, prioritizing that we are working with sellers who are engaged proactively in creating benefit for the environment. And there's a lot of them out there right now.
Yeah. I mean, Yuba's doing some good work too, but I just think we're kind of on the cusp, and maybe it's going to be when some of this litigation comes to fruition. But there's got to be some payback to that system. It just cannot just be take. Somehow we've got to work this so that we're actually contributing to the healing of the Bay Delta.
Yeah, I agree.
I know this is a longer conversation that we need to have, and I just want to also flag too that in this year we are reducing our own in-stream flows in response to the drought. I want to make sure that if we are thinking about this project and we should be in terms of being environmentally protective of the Delta, I want to make sure that we're also protecting our own local environment as well, and in-stream flow releases to protect our fisheries. So again, I think there's more details that we need to be worked out here, and I know we could go for quite some time diving into this, but I think we need to give some more thought in a broader scheme, both in the Delta and in the Central Valley, as well as locally.
In Lagunitas Creek, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Right. So I think what we're saying to you as a board is that for this to go forward, we're going to need some guardrails around how we use this, this new facility, and and that there's going to need to be specific and meaningful support for environmental protection going forward.
And how we source it. So how we use it, how we source it.
Yeah. And that brings us to the last principle that you have here, which is the intertie will not adversely affect the operations of any partner water agency. That seems to me to be basic. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. That seems to be well stated. Any further board conversation on that piece? I'm sure that's going to be extremely important to both Contra Costa and East Bay Mud, as well as any future partners that we work with.
Yeah, I think it's implicit.
Yeah.
It has been expressed by Sonoma.
Yeah.
Okay. Does management and staff, do you guys feel that you've got the direction you need from us to come up with another refined version of these principles?
Yeah, I think we do. I think this was a helpful discussion, and it gives us enough for the next version. I think, we're probably a couple versions away, but the goal is we're going to be bright-eyed in the morning and do some work and bring this to COM's conservation meeting with the intention to get to the point that the board would be comfortable with us submitting these as draft, because East Bay Mud is interested and their board's interested where we're going with principles, with the understanding that we still have work to do, but it would give them an indication of where we're headed.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Do we have any further board comment on this item before I go to public comment? Okay, public comment, on this item. Terry?
We have three public comments. The first three, Ed Jamison, Paul Duder, then Roger Roberts.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Jamison.
Hi, this is Ed. I'd like to address the first principle about when we can use the intertie. What I'm hearing you saying is that we're going to spend $100 million on an intertie that shall only be used for internal use. And that's basically a condition that says we'll only use this $100 million program as a condition to use it. We shall kill Marin's landscaping. I've listened to this board for 2 months now, and the sub rosa agenda appears to be to kill most of the landscaping and achieve some incredible reduction in per capita use on the order of 70%. This approach would certainly accomplish that. You will eventually catch us in a drought. You will kill our landscaping with this kind of a condition. This pipeline is our only hope of surviving a drought, whether it's this year or next year or 4 years from now. This is an absolutely outrageous proposal. We're not just talking about grass and medians here. we're talking about most of the landscape in Marin. And to propose that we shall not use a pipeline to help preserve the beauty of Marin is just an outrageous principle. I can't believe that I'm hearing some support for this from more than one person on this board. Please think about what you have been describing the last few months. This is conservation run amok. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Mr.
Mr.
Duder?
Jameson, I'm just going to say very quickly in response, I think you've misinterpreted what we're saying. This isn't the only source of water supply we have. What we are saying is that to go to the Central Valley to, we have to justify what we're doing. It's not our only source of supply. Nobody wants to destroy, landscaping in Marin. We've got all sorts of programs to provide support for landscaping, but there's a difference, but there's a range here. This isn't a binary issue. It's not, we either have, extraordinary water waste or we have nothing or we have deserts. There's a huge middle ground here. And, we're happy to talk with you offline about this, but nobody's suggesting that we shouldn't have landscaping here. Obviously, I'm just going to speak for I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I'm speaking for the board, but other members can speak for themselves. I certainly don't think that we should be in any way, shape, or form eliminating landscaping in Marin. The question is, can we have landscaping and how do we have landscaping that makes sense for Marin, that is sustainable in the light of the reality of climate change? And it is a reality. We're not going to be able to pretend that we live in Massachusetts or Florida or any other place that gets 44 inches of rain a year. That is the reality in which we're living. So the question is, how do we have the best opportunity for landscaping for this community that is sustainable for the long term? This is a longer conversation than we can have right now, but I disagree with you that what we're suggesting is the end of landscaping. It is the opposite. It is how do we sustain landscaping in a way that makes sense for the long term, that it is affordable and that is reasonable for this community. But it's a longer conversation.
Yeah, and it's complicated. Keep in mind that if you go to Greece or you go to Spain, you don't see grass. And grass is British carry on because it rains more in London in the summer than it rains in the winter.
Right.
But more importantly, the real problem facing Marin, in my opinion, is that we have 2 years of raw water storage. And a typical water district in the West has 4 years of raw water storage. If we had 4 years of raw water storage, we wouldn't be talking about these issues at this point in time. We would still be concerned and still working on it. But the important part to keep in mind is that the intertie is basically conceptually increasing our reservoir storage capacity. That's what it's really doing. It's buying resiliency and stretching our current resources further. That's what's going on here. And that's the value of this project. So we just need to keep that in the back of the mind that we're not able to build more reservoirs because of a court ruling that says we have to release any additional water that we capture out of the current creek system. So we are working to our damnedest to get this thing straight and get it done in a quick and efficient manner that gives us water supply that we can count on in the event that things keep changing in the direction that they're changing. And I remind us all of what Secretary Rumsfeld said. We don't know what we don't know.
Right. I'll also say that we have a real interest in maintaining landscape because that is one of our strongest defenses against climate change. So it's just a question of what kind of landscaping. And to Larry Russell's point, grass is not our future, it's our past. I'm sorry, Terry, do we have other comments?
Yes, we have 5 more. Paul Duder, then Roger Roberts, please. Mr. Duder.
Thanks. My question actually is kind of a follow on what Director Russell just mentioned. So a general, perhaps summary of a problem statement is that we have 2 years of raw water storage. We need 4, which means we have a gap. I'm not sure what the gap is. I've never seen that gap actually, mentioned, but it seems to me the gap is perhaps 30,000 acre feet.
No.
I don't see any of the projects that are going to cover that gap. In other words, if we build the intertie, I don't see how we avoid using it all the time, because we have no other projects that are going to cover the gap that we have. If we really want to abide by the principles, then that means we have an obligation to develop projects to cover the gap that we have outside of the intertie. Otherwise, we're going to be using the intertie all the time. That's my comment.
It's a good comment. It isn't that we need 30,000 acre feet more storage. We have currently about 80,000 or something like that acre feet of storage. The issue is that we need the water production from that volume of storage. So that's the key thing. And that's what the intertie does, is it brings in a water supply that's equal to adding another reservoir of that size or larger. I think it's actually a little larger than 30,000 acre feet, but it's in that ballpark.
Yeah, which means that the intertie is not going to be used for emergency purposes. Right?
Exactly.
So, that is the contradiction, you know, that I'm kind of struggling with, honestly, with these principles, because I think they're going to just, you know, vanish.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that, but I mean, part of the question is, what is our demand? Look, we were projected some years ago that we were going to be at 36,000 acre feet in demand, and we're not. We're at 25. So, I'm not confident that projections, of demand are where we're going to be. Technology and various other, changes in water use have fundamentally altered the forecasting landscape. We're seeing this not just here in Marin, we're seeing it all over in California, and we're seeing it all over the West. So with all due respect to the commenter who I know and respect, I don't think we do have a gap like that. I think we're going to continue to see a reduction in per capita demand and in overall demand. We have a long way to go before we hit demand hardening, and probably decades, honestly. And so I'm not seeing that gap in demand that you're seeing. But again, that's a longer conversation that we might need to have offline.
President Kohler,
gap in supply, not demand.
President Kohler, could I make a comment? I wanted to share that, consistent with where you were going, is we are actively pursuing many water supply options. Today, we are getting more water from Sonoma than we've ever gotten in the history through an innovative partnership that we've developed with Sonoma to take excess Russian River flows following periods of storms. And even during drought years, there are times we can get that water. We're working with them on a broader resiliency effort that includes groundwater storage and retrieval. So there's many fronts we're working on. It's not just solely looking at the pipe. So, and the other point of using it frequently, we've gone between the 70s and today not using the pipe.
Right.
Yes, climate change is happening and we're getting droughts more frequently, but this is not going to be every year, every other year. And I think in the next month, staff can do some projections looking at the history and projecting, and we all know projections are worth the paper, but it is an important exercise for us to do and look at when we would trigger under different scenarios the use of this pipe. And I think that will clear some of this up. It'll be helpful anyway.
Carrie, do we have other? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, we have a few more. Roger Roberts, Larry Minikes, and then James Krajewski. Mr. Roberts.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
There's another issue that hasn't been raised, and a potential constraint, it seems to me, is efforts that are taking place in the Central Valley for recharging the groundwater. And would you actually be impacting those efforts in the Sacramento Valley of attempts in various water districts to recharge the groundwater system, because you certainly don't want to interfere with that process, which is essential for the state as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ben, do you want to address that?
Yeah,
I just wanted to say one thing, Mr. Roberts, those are the agencies that I was sort of clumsily trying to describe as the target agencies we should be working with to encourage those recharge programs. To help heal that watershed.
I wanted to note that there are some very large, massive efforts that have really been begun largely by water agencies to partner with groundwater basins on aquifer storage and retrieval that really are what we're looking at working with Sonoma in terms of the Russian River. So these programs you're talking about are really being kind of driven by water agencies to take advantage during very wet years and store it in the ground and benefit the groundwater basin, and then having the opportunity to take it out during dry years. So I think it's built into largely what we're talking about and doing, but I do appreciate the comment, Director Kohler, of thinking about fitting that in terms of the earlier principles we talked about.
And keep in mind too, that the water we're talking about, Roger, is coming from water that would have been used to grow rice. California is the largest grower of rice in the world and the largest grower of cotton, neither of which are crops that should be grown in California from a water use standpoint. They're just too high. If you think about where rice is grown in the world, it's in Southeast Asia and places like that, where it's basically a monsoon. More months are monsoon than they are monsoon. And we're growing rice in these artificial environments that demand tremendous amounts of water to keep a crop that's really made to grow in the tropics. So, you know, there's a reckoning coming in California in the food business to address the where the water should go. 80% of our water is going to ag for around 3% of our state gross domestic product. Now, you got to have food, okay? You know, one could argue that food's too low price. That's one way of arguing it. It's really a bigger piece of the gross product than that. But the bottom line is that's investing a lot of water in the state. It used to be more. It used to be 90%. Now it's 80. So the ag has done a lot to decrease their demand. But we still have this problem of where are we spending our water in the big picture? But the water we're talking about would have been used to grow rice. That's where it would have gone. So it wouldn't have ended up going south. It wouldn't have ended up recharging anybody's aquifer. Maybe a little bit in the rice growing area up there. But you know, we also have the problem of salt, that when you grow agricultural products, the water gets concentrated, the salts get concentrated in what's water's left, and you end up with the Mesopotamia problem of just too much salt. So you know, that's all complicated stuff in the ag balance, and all issues that in the next 30 years we're going to have to address in California. And there's efforts going on about that right now. The regional board state board is doing very good work trying to get their arms around it. They're going a little too slowly for my taste, but you know, this water would not end up in anyone's aquifer at this point in time. It's just water that would have gone someplace else.
Right, but I mean, that sort of ignores the whole overarching issue that the Bay Delta water is overallocated. So
sure.
I agree with you as far as value, you know, yeah, urban uses, municipal use is a higher use. I agree with that principle. Sure. But overarching the whole thing, it's over allocated, and we're going to kill the golden goose unless we do something about it. So
just like
you know,
yes, that's exactly my point. Yes, it's time. In my opinion, in California, we need a water czar, and somebody who backs away from traditional water rights But,
So,
you know, we're talking about huge changes in the culture.
Maybe if we can bring, I mean, there's a lot to be said on this topic, and it's getting late, and I can see Director Kohler already looking to try to rein us in a little. But I think there's a point here, which is that there are sustainable sources of water in the Central Valley, and there's some deeply unsustainable, environmentally detrimental sources.
Exactly.
We want to partner, if we're going to do this, we want to partner with sustainable sources. I think the point of an example of a partnership with a water district that is sustainably managing their groundwater, that are putting water in wet years, banking that water, and then using that water in dry years. That type of sustainable management would be the kind of partnership that I think we might look to, and maybe we can find some way to articulate some values that guide us in the right direction and steer us away from the wrong ones. So I think we're all on the same page.
I agree. I think I'm actually hearing a lot of consensus here, so that's great. Terry, do we want to move on to the next comment?
Yes, the last two, Larry Minikes, then James Krajewski. Mr. Minikes?
Good evening. I just want to say thank you for what's really a very, very thoughtful conversation tonight. It's really pleasing to be at this end and listen to all the aspects that everyone is discussing here. I'd like to Director Kohler's earliest comment, and that is responding to the first speaker. This is what I had written down as the first speaker was, and it's almost exactly the same. What this is really about is we need to be rethinking landscape in the light of climate change, and along with that, improving biodiversity and adding resilience to our system. And it's not ripping out lawns and destroying and we're all going to be desert-like. We really need to rethink things. It's not just here in water, it's cities, it's the state, it's countries, it's everywhere. We all need to start rethinking about the way we are interacting with our environment. So lawns, I don't need to say any more on this one. I do have a little trouble with the bright line comments, because to me, it sounds as if you're building inflexibility into the system, when what I think management is asking for here is water management is really about forecasting, and you want some flexibility. You want perhaps a series of circumstances, if you will, as to when you can draw water in from that, so that we don't spend all this money on this pipeline and then get caught flat-footed because we had a bright line that wasn't crossed until it was too late. I think Paul Seller said earlier something about April being too late if we're going to start pumping water then to make those decisions. So just please keep that part in mind. And with that, thank you so much.
Thanks, Larry.
And Mr. Krajewski, please.
Hi, thank you. I found this discussion very interesting, but it was extremely confusing with the logic. We're sort of balancing, yes, landscaping is fine or good even or whatever, but then water should only be used for health and safety. So I really think that the district needs to engage the public in this discussion in some kind of way outside of these meetings. For example, we still can't find basic information about how our water is used on the website. What about some pages about fact pages and so forth on the website about water use? And what about asking the public how they want the water used? Do they want water used for landscaping? Do they not? You know, there was mention of a water czar. Well, in many ways, the district is behaving as a water czar. They're saying, well, we're not going to do this, and we're not going to do this, and we're not going to do desal because you don't need it for this or you don't need it for that. I would urge the district to start engaging the public in these discussions and to have information on the website so that you can find out what the public thinks and what they want. And there's also the whole issue of planning for the future with increased housing and increased number of people in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay. This was an information item, so I'm just going to check with Ben about whether you received the direction that you were looking for so that we can move on to the next item.
We did. Thank you for kind of navigating this. It was very great, good feedback for us, and we'll revisit this topic tomorrow.
Great. That brings us to item 11, which is water demand offsets.
Good evening, Board of Directors. Lucy Croy, Water Quality Manager. I'm going to start off this presentation sharing my screen. Okay. So tonight we have a presentation to introduce the concept of a net zero water program for discussion and further development. And this really stems from, looking back a few months back shortly after the water shortage emergency was declared by the board. And then in July, Ordinance 453 was adopted by the board, which required new connections to defer potable water irrigated landscape installations until after the conclusion of the water shortage emergency. And at that time, the board asked staff to look into the development of a offset program, or also called a net zero water program. So tonight we're going to start off. Crystal Yasmin, our Director of Engineering, will be giving an overview and review of new connections, both history and looking forward for the district. And then we'll be moving into a discussion on the various approaches to net zero water and implementation considerations for the district to bring this kind of a program forward. So first off, I'm going to hand off to Crystal to give a review.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. So just a little bit of background into new service connections. I know there's been a lot of talk about this increase that we're going to see in new service connection requests. And I want to go through how we do it and what is currently on the books for what's coming and what we've processed in the last 5 years. So basically the way it works in our property development and water services department is it starts off with a water service availability letter. And what that is when the planning agency is determining entitlement for a project, they'll send a request to us for a water service availability letter. And we'll then send that letter. And because of the drought emergency, we have a lot of caveats now when we send them that letter, essentially, stating that, yes, water is available, but, given the drought conditions, conditions might change, essentially. So after that, and we've issued about 100 of these letters in the last 3 months. And we estimate that really only 10 to 15% of potential projects actually get built. And so the next step is a water service application. Once a project gets a permit, a building permit, then it's sent to us for a water service application. And we get about 200 water service applications a year. And we average that about 40 of these would entail a new service connection and add additional demand to our supply. A lot of the service applications are not for additional demand. It might be just a requirement of the building permit. For example, a landscape review. And then the majority of the applications that we get out of the 40 that will actually result in a new service connection a year, it adds about 20 to 60 acre feet additional demand each year. And then I'm going to go on and talk about a little bit more detail in the applications we have in the hopper right now, but I'll also talk about some pending projects for larger developments, some pipeline extension agreements that we have coming to the board and that have already been approved by the board, but construction hasn't finished yet. And then water supply assessment projects, which are projects that could be, over 500 people or 500 connections. So next slide. All right, so this is a new histogram that you saw in the GM monthly report that was in the packet tonight. This is a histogram of new service connections over the last 5 years. So how many have we issued? So as I mentioned, on average, it's about 40 a year on average. And you can see there was a definite downturn in new service connections being installed since COVID. And I'm sure that was a result of people, socializing in place or social distancing. But and then I also want to point out one detail is that a new service connection might entail more than one dwelling. So it could be a multi-use water meter for, say, an apartment complex, 1 meter for many units. So I have staff looking into refining this graphic so that we can see the number of dwellings or perhaps the amount of additional supply that's associated with each of these new service connections, just to give you an idea of the history moving forward. Next time, we'll get this graph more and more detailed as we move along. All right, next slide, please. So yeah, as I mentioned, the water service availability letters is when the planning department is deciding, the entitlement for the project, and it's sort of like a routine process, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not an application for a new service. It's just, is water available? So, and as I mentioned, approximately 100 letters over the past 3 months, and only 10 to 15%, or 10 to 15% are never built. All right, next slide. And again, then it goes to the application. We get about 200 a year. About 40 of them result in new services. The majority of the applications do not increase our water demand. For example, if you do a remodel on a house of a certain size, the local fire marshal will say you have to install a sprinkler system. Well, sprinkler systems are not considered adding demand because it's for emergency purposes only. And so the majority of them have been increases in water meter size driven by fire code requirements. And again, over the last 5 years, it's been about 20 to 60 acre feet of additional supply each year. All right, next slide, please. So right now we have about 100 active applications. 38 of them are ADUs, which would estimate increasing demand by a mere 3.7 acre feet, 7 single family residences, 3 commercial requests, and 2 multifamily. And then we do the applications as part of the building permit process. And at that time, we'll look at what they're installing, and we'll look at our ordinances for gray water, landscape review, and advise the applicant accordingly. All right, next slide. Now, some larger projects that we know about but we haven't gotten applications on yet is the Whistle Stop project, which is downtown Santa Fe on that vacant lot between 3rd and 2nd, I believe. That's going to be 67 affordable housing units for seniors. There's a hotel, a Hilton Hotel that's proposed on Francisco Boulevard. The Oaks Senior Housing is 126 senior apartments. And the neighborhood at Los Gamos, which actually, I was just looking this one up. There's a public hearing for the city of San Rafael on the mitigated net deck for this project on December 14th. And that's the apartment complex that's proposed behind the 911 emergency call center on Los Gamos off of Lucas Valley Road. We know about it, but they haven't given us an application yet because they haven't gotten their final approval from the planning department from the city of San Rafael. And so a lot of times we don't hear about these projects unless they call us. If they're making inquiries, say the developer is calling us to make an inquiry. So one of our information gaps is that, planning departments might have a lot of projects that they know of, but we don't know about them yet. So that the mechanism for communications between projects that have yet to apply, could use some refinement. All right, next slide, please.
Crystal, before you move on, can you go back to that slide for a second?
Yeah.
So this feels like something that can be addressed. I mean, we have all sorts of fantastic communication technology and other options. So, I mean, not to get into that, but I mean, this feels like something that we can work on with the county and other planning agencies. But my quick question to you is, of the 4 projects that we know about, that you've got listed here. I mean, one you have listed as affordable housing. To what extent do you know or have a sense that these others also involve affordable housing, or at least partial of affordable housing? Because
Yeah,
that's really the issue that we're most fundamentally facing here in this county.
yeah, good question. We do have some of that information available. It's not in the presentation tonight. We could get into the details if requested later. And I do have some information on affordable housing at the end of the slide as well. So yes, we do often when we get the project description, it'll tell us, so many units of which a certain percent is affordable housing. So we get that information at the start.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, next slide. So pipeline extension agreement. So the board doesn't necessarily see a water service application for a new meter. The only time the board actually sees big developments come across for approval is when it involves a pipeline extension agreement. To the extent that we are doing work on our own infrastructure and assets, there's an environmental review process for that under CEQA. So, and the agreement itself involves typically a large exchange of money so that, the applicant would pay us to extend a large pipeline in the street to get it to their development. So pipeline extension agreements do come to the board for approval. And we have one actually coming up on Friday, the Talus Reserve, which is under construction. It's out on Lucas Valley Road. It's 28 single family homes plus 5 ADUs, 7.4 acre feet. We are requiring both recycled water and potable water supply to that development. There was an EIR written for that project that was approved by the County of Marin. But as the owner of the pipeline who's extending the pipeline, we still have to have board approval to proceed with the project and to have the agreement for the contract, which entails the construction of the additional recycled water supply line and the potable water supply lines. So that's coming to the board on Friday. And another big one that we know about is the Marydale Road project, which is almost complete in construction. You can see it there off of Highway 101, just north of San Pedro Road. It's 45 townhome units, 9 are below market value, 6.3 acre feet. And again, we are requiring recycled water and potable water connections for that project. And that pipeline extension agreement will be coming to the board hopefully next month. We're just finalizing the CEQA analysis on it. But we also have some pipeline extension agreements that were already approved by the board in the last few years. Lamond, San Rafael, 25 services, that was actually just completed about 2 or 3 weeks ago. That's off of on the way to Peacock Gap over there by Andy's Market. Anyway, so see, these are some of the other pipeline extension agreements that have been approved by the board in the past. So next slide, please. So large projects, ones that have over 500 units. Typically they have an EIR, and if it's over 500 units, it triggers what's called a water supply assessment. It's part of a CEQA process. So we know of the Northgate Town Square project where they're going to convert the mall into mixed use with an open street and commercial and residential. They're proposing 1,356 living units, and it'd be 190 acre feet of demand. Likely it's years out. There hasn't been a water supply assessment done yet. The CEQA has not been completed yet. So we haven't gotten any applications on this project. We just know about it, that it's coming. Next is the Golden Gate Theological Seminary at Strawberry. They're proposing mixed use on 127 acres with dorms, a fitness center, a preschool, some single and multifamily homes, residential care facility, and they're estimating about 200 acre feet of demand. Now that site already has water entitlement. So it's unclear yet whether or not the conversion of the site to these units will trigger a water supply assessment, since they already have the water entitlement for that site. But that's another large project that we know about. And then additional projects, as I mentioned earlier, are subject to notification by the local planning agencies to us. So sometimes the developer will call us, sometimes we'll hear about it through the grapevine, but these are the large ones that we know about today. All right, next slide, please.
Crystal, yeah. Do we know how much water Northgate is using now? what the
The mall?
demand is now?
I could find out, and it is in our recycled water distribution zone. So
Right.
we also have recycled water there already for their landscaping. So yeah, we could get their meter numbers and find out what they're using.
It would just be interesting to see what the difference would be with this proposal versus what's going on there now.
Sure, sure. Okay, next slide. So
Going
in
back-
summary,
Going back to Northgate for a second, they
Yeah.
don't use it for toilet flush? They're not dual
at the
plumbed?
mall, do they use recycled water at the mall? I'll have to get back to you on that one. Good question.
Yeah, I
though.
don't know either. Yeah, I
I
don't,
do
I'm
know
not
they
seeing any
have-
sign.
Yeah.
They do use recycled water for irrigation around the mall, and they did a couple of years ago a remodel of some of the bathrooms, and it was added to those at that time.
Cool.
Okay. Oh, good. Okay, good.
So
Great.
their net water use is probably pretty low, huh? I mean, all they'd be using for cooking and a little bit of somebody using a drinking fountain
Yeah.
and the ice
There's-
cream at movie theater.
There's a new beer garden going in where the ice skating rink usually is. It's under construction. Anyway, moving on. Next
Hopefully they're
slide.
using the reclaimed water for the ice.
Yeah. Okay. So pending applications, we have an 8 acre feet on the books for small projects. Known large projects, it's about 68 acre feet. Those are those ones that we haven't received an application for yet, but we know about them. Pending pipeline extension agreements, 13.7 acre feet. Plus there's 20 that were already approved that's in construction. And then large long-term projects that may require water supply assessment. What we know about today is about those two large projects amounting to about 400 acre feet. All right, I think that concludes my summary of historical and what's current in terms of new service connection, new service connections. I'll hand it back over to Lucy.
Thank you. Okay, so now transitioning over to kind of looking forward and how we could approach some of these new connections in different phases with a net zero water program. First, to just start off very fundamentally, what net zero water programs are, and the goal is really to mitigate any increase that comes from new connections within the service area. So any developers that come in are required to offset that additional water demand. And you know, there's various ways to do that that we'll get into later in the presentation. But what we often see is that this is a methodology that's used instead of doing new connection moratoriums. And it's also seen pretty frequently in California communities that are most prone to droughts and chronic water shortages. So kind of a stopgap to make sure that any additional water demands on the system are met with offsets as that new development comes in. So taking a look at a number of agencies across California, what you really see is that there's no one model that fits, you know, a singular agency. There's different approaches for each that can be incorporated into a policy and a program, and that's the same for us, for the district moving ahead. And a number of these agencies have started their programs, you know, many years back. So Morro Bay, even looking back to 1985. And what we see when we look at these agencies and their programs is that they've adapted over time. So, you know, making sure that, you know, every few years, seeing what works, what doesn't work, and how best to find the water savings and find that demand offset in their community. Including, you know, Santa Rosa City is looking at doing one right now up north tied to their water shortage emergency, their program. So when we look at these agencies, we see that there's really three primary approaches to be considered within a net zero water program. The first one is considering if it's short term and really a response to water shortages or emergencies. And that's, you know, typically seen, you know, like I said, with Santa Rosa, so tying it to their water shortage emergency. And what we're finding is that that's probably not the long-term solution for Marin, because we're trying to offset in the long term, looking at developments coming in and finding a way and a method to do that. Another approach is for the developers to be required to actually do the direct install and to perform that fixture replacement in the service area. So an example is in Napa, they require the developers to find really high water use toilets and replace them with high efficiency toilets to offset the demand that they're going to be bringing into the community. And at this point, what we're seeing is that many of these agencies are moving away from that model, mainly due to saturation from fixtures and reaching kind of that high efficiency saturation point. So we see that not only in other agencies, but likely in our community as well. And then a third option or a third approach is really to have the developer pay an in lieu water demand offset fee that's developed to have the offset fee within the district and fund programs that the district goes for to find water savings. So to dive a little bit deeper into what the water demand offset fee is really doing, it's an offset fee that's in lieu of performing actual fixture replacements. So the district would collect funds to implement a demand reduction program and offset that additional demand that's created by the new connections. And I'll get into a little bit more detail on how that's kind of calculated and what that program would look like a little bit more. But more or less, those offset fees would be collected along with our connection fees. So just to give an idea of at what time, we would see that take place. So in thinking about, how to go about a net zero program with the district, we've started to take a look at different water savings that we have currently and how we would create an offset fee and what that offset fee would fund within the district. So it wouldn't fund existing programs, but it would fund programs that are enhanced and taking the recycled water system and expanding it to offset the additional demand from a developer, or taking our current conservation incentive and expanding it $1 more per square foot or $2 more per square foot than we're already funding. And looking at the cost savings for each of those programs, these are very, I will say these are very preliminary estimates, and this is really subject as we dive into this analysis a little bit more to study kind of what is a realistic basis for an offset fee, but wanted to kind of give you guys an idea, give the board an idea of what options are out there. For the recycled water expansion, we're seeing a pretty, wide variety between 14,000 per acre feet to 137. And then for conservation, you can see it's similar as well. So this is the cost per acre foot for the district to take on the water savings ourselves and fund those programs and collect that fee from the developer at the time that they come in for a new connection.
Lucy,
Yeah.
can you just go back to that slide? I have to say,
Yeah.
I'm surprised by these conservation incentive costs per acre foot. They're
Yeah.
wildly out of line with what we're seeing around the West and nationally. So, I don't want to get into that in too much detail, but I mean, they don't really make that much sense to me in light of what we're seeing all across California and the West. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Is that assuming that we're paying for all of this in year one and then there's never any other benefits? I mean, it just seems kind of crazy to me.
So what it is that it's calculated based on an enhancement of our existing program. So it would be on top of, the labor that we're already putting into the existing program. And so it is at times when we're diving into the details a little bit less intuitive than we would have expected, but we wanted to kind of show a scale of where we would see the numbers fall between different replacement different
Yeah.
turf conservation programs.
Yeah, I understand. So it's already 9 o'clock, so I don't want to get into this, but I'm gonna need to see a breakdown about where these numbers came from and how these are
Yeah,
calculated.
absolutely. So this is really just an initial.
Because I'm just saying it's so
Yes.
wildly out of line with what we're seeing in every other municipality in the West. It just doesn't add up. So
Right. This was calculated, based looking purely just at, I believe, 24 gallons per square foot, and
Okay.
then an additional 1 per square foot. So
Right.
it
Okay.
was very
I just want to see the numbers when
first.
you have a chance.
Yeah, we will absolutely. So then taking those numbers and then applying it to what, an example. So, someone walks in and they want to develop a single family residential home. How it works is that their projected demand is going to be 0.28 acre feet per year. So that's then applied, looking at this offset of how much turf would need to be converted in order to offset that demand, and applying the fee that I just showed you. And so just as I noted, these are really up for a lot more refinement, but it just gives an idea of the scale that we're looking at, and kind of looking for feedback, of course. So it's great to hear exactly what you're saying, and I think we want to hear exactly, kind of the first reaction and where you expect these numbers. What kind of offset fees do you think are reasonable, and what kind of demand is what kind of what offset fees are expected moving forward. So I'm also showing up here the non-residential for 1 acre foot per year. So these are just very preliminary numbers, but just giving an idea of how it's calculated at a very high level.
And can you go back to that just for a second? I just wanted to share, as we develop this, one consideration is this would be a new fee, and developers will scrutinize this, of course, as kind of impact fees get scrutinized. And one approach as we get into this is think about, we want, in establishing a new fee, for it to be very defensible. So doing it out of the gate on the conservative side, the lower end, to establish it and then optimize it and refine it and potentially increase it in the years ahead, may be just a consideration as we move forward.
I think the other thing, Ben, is that we need to have control of this money. It can't just flow into the general fund. It's got to be put into a pocket that does only what is being called out.
Absolutely, Director Russell. That would be a legal, very clear requirement. So it would all go into a dedicated fund, and we would track it and use it only and specifically. That's correct, for that purpose.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Ben. So looking forward, how these fees can be used, it's really to achieve water savings is the end goal. So just wanted to iterate that that we can use these incentives to enhance existing programs that we have. So the recycled water system, for our leak detection, for our conservation programs, as well as putting in new programs that will increase water savings. So that's where the fees would go towards, and keep them separate and track them along with like our connection fees. So a few other considerations when we're thinking about implementation, there is much more work that needs to go into the analysis and refinements. Tonight is really about kind of the first showing and the first thoughts and of what we've put together so far. And it can be implemented over the coming months. And as Crystal noted, outreach to cities in the county will be really key in moving this forward and making sure that communication is tied closely together with those stakeholders.
Lucy, you picked an excellent graphic there. Is that Caltrans doing that? Or are we paying, someone paying for that? Or is it Caltrans doing it out of public service?
I'm not sure. Emma, do you know?
It's Photoshop.
No, it's the real sign. I I mean, that there is that exact
Yeah.
message off the Caltrans signs.
It is up now. I see them now, but at the time of printing this, we mocked it up to encourage them to do it.
Yeah, but that's not the question. The
Yeah.
question is, are the water districts paying for it, or is the state
Oh.
voluntarily doing it?
We asked Caltrans to do that. So we're not paying.
Cool. And they did it.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. And we being MMWD?
Mhm.
Oh, cool. Cool. Because I mean, I see them around, they're out way outside of our area. I see the signs too. So they picked up the message and they're carrying it around the bay.
Oh, that I didn't realize it was outside of Marin, but
Yeah.
that's good to know.
Yeah. That was an excellent presentation, Lucy.
Yeah.
Thank you. So just in summary, you know, there's still some more complexities to work out and obviously come up with a thoughtful approach for the district, you know, and bring the numbers back. Let me stop this sharing. But we've kind of started the first move forward, and we will, you know, more than anything, we wanted to get feedback tonight on kind of the initial take on what we've put together at this point.
I think it's great, speaking on behalf of myself. And I think the other thing you need to mention is that the true basis of this is to have a sustainable way to accommodate new connections without having impact on our current water supply. That's really what's going on here. And you guys have done an excellent job of capturing the concept in numbers. And I think, Ben, it might be an easier sale than you think it will be to the developers. They'll see the value.
Well, since I think this probably came from me, I mean, this is something we're starting to see around the West is, you know, requiring that, you know, new connections, you know, not provide additional burdens onto, you know, strained water supply systems. I just want to say I'm very grateful for the analysis that you've done. Sorry, I've had a very long day of talking. So I think this is great. I'm still a little concerned about the basis for some of these numbers. So I think we do need to have some unpacking of that. So if you could provide, you know, some of that data to the board, I think that would be useful. But going forward, I agree with Larry Russell. I think that, I mean, the presentation was great, but I think we need to, you know, move this forward, right? I mean, if we're going to have new development, which, you know, there's all sorts of reasons for that, it can't be at the expense of, you know, having to go out and develop new supply. We had a very long conversation about our impact on the Central Valley, Sonoma County, and other places. So given the technology that is available now for water use efficiency, I think it does make a lot of sense to place the burden on developers to ensure that they're not adding to the burden of the county and existing users. So I think this makes a lot of sense. And I hope the board will be supporting, you know, the concept of, you know, of zero net water going forward.
You know, as far as accomplishing that, there's a lot of technology and fixtures that do water recycling on a very small scale. And, you know, I like the idea of offsets. I'm not quite following how the offset prices were calculated. Like the idea of expanding our recycled water system. But, you know, we may also need to consider some kind of upgrade to our code and efficiency requirements to require installation of some of that new technology that recycles water on you know, a individual development scale. So it's just, it's another way of getting to zero impact development.
Yeah, as long as we keep in mind little steps for little feet.
Well, it's available now. I mean, it's
sure. That's what I mean, though. You know, but to match the capability of the user with the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be the of scale, so it would be larger developments. But you know, that's kind of what we're talking about here. So.
I know there's more to come on this, but I just want to thank staff for pulling this together. This is exactly, I think, the approach we need to be understanding better and come up with some way to leverage what future growth we do have to make it have a zero offset and zero to impact and to fund conservation. So thank you for pulling this together, and look forward to seeing refined numbers around this.
Yeah, and I mean, not to belabor it too much, I do think San Francisco Public Utility District does have an ordinance where developments over whatever 50,000 square feet are required to have on-site recycling. So it might be something staff.
250,000.
Okay, well, it might be something, we should take a look at some point.
Yeah, 250,000. They have black water and they have to have full stormwater capture.
Yeah, their requirements are far in excess of ours because they have so much density in their new development. I mean, so much more density in their new development than we do. And virtually no on-site landscaping at all, I think.
Well, some, but not much. Planters boxes.
Are you quibbling with me seriously? At 9:15?
Anyway, it's another approach that, the board should take a look at.
I agree. Okay, this is an information item. Any further board comment on this? Okay, Terry, do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, we have two, Roger Roberts, then Tamar Sanders. Mr. Roberts?
Just a question, because it may be off the wall, and it's really addressed to Molly. I assume that such charges are not a COSA issue.
I'm sorry, a what issue? I didn't.
COSA.
Cost of service.
Oh, no, they're not. They're not a Prop 218, if that's what you're getting at, Mr. Roberts.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Tamar or Ms. Saunders, I'm sorry.
Either is fine. Good evening to all MMWD board members. I'm from Eden Housing. I'm the developer working in partnership with Vivillon, formerly known as Whistle Stop, to develop the Healthy Aging Campus that you're probably familiar with. Very unique project, already entitled mixed use in downtown San Rafael, where 100% of the units are affordable senior housing. 2 commercial floors will be operated by Vivillon, providing senior and healthcare services to the residents and the surrounding community. The project has been in development for almost a decade, and we've been extremely humbled to see the community, county, city, again, even the governor to rally in support of this project because of the variety of needs it will be meeting for the area. I asked the board to consider the financial impact, obviously, of water offsets that could have on affordable housing projects, especially because we're already paying other municipal fees, such as connection fees and things of that nature in addition to this. Moreover, adding more to already high development costs make affordable housing projects less competitive in receiving funding from state and federal sources. So with that, we definitely urge the board to consider exempting affordable housing developments and community serving organizations from programs such as these water offsets. Thank you.
Thank you. The next 2 speakers, Anne Gray, then Bob Pendoli. Ms. Gray.
Thank you so much. I do echo what Tamar Saunders just stated. I'm Anne Gray. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Vivillon, formerly known as Whistle Stop, and the financial impact of water offsets would be detrimental to our project, but we are very grateful for the support of the board on looking at how we can advance affordable housing projects, even with all of the present challenges in front of us. So I would like to say thank you for that, and that you please do exempt community serving uses and affordable housing from any water hookup moratoriums or offset fees so that we can bring the Healthy Aging Campus to fruition. The Whistle Stop project that was mentioned in an earlier presentation is the Vivillon project. We recently changed our name, and our permits are with the city of San Rafael right now. now. We expect to have those back within the next 6 to 8 weeks. And so you'll be getting that letter shortly. And we really are hopeful that we will get this project to completion within the next 24 months with the community rallying behind it to get us to the finish line. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Pendoli?
Good evening. My name is Bob Pendoli. I'm speaking from the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative. We're concerned about the potential impact of a water demand offset program on affordable housing, in particular, charging nonprofit developers a fee for local water conservation is only going to drive up the cost of creating these affordable units, and which are already going to be water efficient by design. Land and labor costs are already very expensive in Marin, and we're concerned that these offset fees would be a real deal killer for deed restricted low-income housing that's so badly needed in Marin. We'd like to see a countywide analysis of how an offset program would impact the per unit cost of the upcoming affordable housing projects and how much water you anticipate being required to meet the new regional housing needs allocations at each income level. There are still opportunities for MMWD to ask its existing customers for greater efficiencies, to fix systems leaks in your own infrastructure, and to invest in recycled water, stormwater capture, and water exchanges and transfers. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. And last speaker, Mr. Minikes, please.
I actually was not planning to speak at all, but to the last two speakers, I very much appreciate their points of view, and that we here in Marin as a community have an obligation to generate affordable housing. We need it in this community, and we have to avoid roadblocks where we can, and sometimes we have to make exceptions. So I hope the board will take the last two commenters into consideration. Thank you and good evening.
There are no further speakers.
Okay. This was an information item, so we're going to move on to item 14, which is the request to fulfill a temporary engineering aid position.
Hi, good evening. Crystal Yasmin, Director of Engineering. So as we pointed out at the beginning, this item was not on the consent calendar, mainly because it's not a budgeted position per se. It's a temporary limited term. Right now, we've been hiring temps through a temp agency that are limited to 1,000 hours to assist with water conservation efforts, namely the turf rebate program. And then we lose them after 1,000 hours. So moving forward, we'd like to go ahead and request the board authorization to fill a temporary engineering aid position. Because it's temporary, it would not increase the permanent FTEs within the district. We do have available budget, but it wasn't specifically budgeted in the 2-year budget program. So with that, are there any questions?
Crystal, 2 years when we say temporary?
Yeah, it's a 2-year temporary engineering aid position.
Okay. Board comments on this item? All right, seeing none. Do we have any public comments on this item, Terry?
There are none.
All right, do I have a motion?
I'll move approval.
Second.
All right, we need a roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Schmidt, Vice President Russell,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. That brings us to our final item, future meeting schedule and agenda items. Apparently, we are destined to spend every single day in board meetings.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. So tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, not 9:30, we'll have our Communications and Water Efficiency Committee meeting. Then on Friday, we'll have our Operations Committee meeting at 9:30. We will have no further meetings for the month of November after this Friday. Then we will come back again in December, starting with our Finance and Administration Committee meeting. And that's all I have.
Okay, any board comments on this item? Any
I have
public
one
comments?
last comment.
Oh, sorry.
I have one last comment, not on this item. And
Oh.
thank you to Sean Horn, who Sean has been on our meeting apparently, and he heard my comment about the 1935 Water District film, and it's already been sent to you all. So
I saw that.
yeah,
Yeah, that's very nice.
so thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Jack.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, any public comments on this item? I want to make sure we dot all our i's and cross all our t's.
There are none.
Okay, then I think we're done. Everybody enjoy. Have a nice night.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you.
Later. Bye.